Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. This is episode number 6 of my YouTube journey. First, a few personal notes. Tomorrow, my son and his wife are supposed to be delivering our first grandchild. It's a little boy named Oakley, and we cannot wait to meet him. And it's going to be one of the most exciting days of my life. I'm already in love with the little fella, and I can't wait one day to share my baseball card collection with him and my love of the sport, and just love on him and be a granddad. So this will be a whole new experience for me. Really looking forward to it. It's a dream come true, and I can't wait. It's one of those deals like I don't even know what I'm going to feel like, but I know it's going to be pretty magical. So anyways, by the time this drops, tomorrow she will probably be in labor. So the next video after that, I may even share a couple of photos or something with my little buddy. So that's kind of going on in my personal life. Also, there's on Instagram, there's a guy named Iowa Dave, and he does podcasts and does a fantastic job. And he's doing 27 collectors in 27 days on his podcast. You can go on Instagram and find him, and he has the link on there. And doing some interesting stories and talking to some fellow collectors. And he actually asked me to do one, so I did one for him, and it's on actually on Wednesdays, which is today that I'm doing this. So it was, I think, episode number 3. So check that out. Talk a little bit about my Mickey Mantle acquisition. Basically what he's doing, he's having each person share a card that they acquired that might have changed their collecting journey, or it was a fork in the road for them or something like that. And I shared that. The first 2 were really entertaining as well. They're not too long, about 20, 25 minutes. So check that out on your way to work or something like that. It's very entertaining. It's just another avenue to enjoy the hobby. Tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about Ty Cobb, one of the greatest players of all time. Pre-war guy. Everybody in the collecting or in sports know a little bit about Ty Cobb. The problem with Ty Cobb is he has this persona that people think about him as this evil, rotten human being, and he's a racist, and he stabbed people and shot people and killed people and raped people and all this other stuff. Totally false. Now, did he fight with people? Absolutely, he did. He was a pretty touchy individual. Really thought highly of himself, had a lot of confidence. But like a lot of pre-war players, they got in scraps. I mean, Babe Ruth chased guys up into the bleachers. Christy Mathewson, of all people, the Christian gentleman, got in a fight with a fan. I mean, it happened back then. It was a different world than it is today. But I mean, even looking back to my childhood in the 1970s, we just had the ending of a World Series, and no one rushed the field. When I was a kid, I remember watching the Yankees win the World Series, and Chris Chambliss and Reggie Jackson taking their hat off and putting it underneath their arm and running for their life. And I remember Reggie looked like a fullback going through there, trying to just knocking people down that were in his way. You don't see that anymore. So imagine what it was like back then. And back then, they would actually have riots in the middle of games. Fans would pour onto the field. There was only one umpire. So there was all kinds of stuff going on back then. So to judge a person off of things like that and put it into modern day pretenses isn't really fair. Most of the ideas that are formed about Ty Cobb came from an author called Al Stump. And his name kind of represents what kind of person he was. He worked with Ty on his autobiography towards the end of Ty's life and spent 11 or 12 days with him, and was trying to write his story. And it wasn't finished when Ty passed away, and wasn't released until, I think, sometime in 1961. That book wasn't that great, but it kind of portrayed Ty in a certain way. It wasn't horrible. But then in the 90s, he wrote another book, and it was called Ty Cobb. What was it called? I wrote it down over here. The Life and Times of the Meanest Man in Baseball in 1994. And in that, he took a lot of artistic liberty and really portrayed Cobb as this horrible racist person. And a lot of those things that was said about him in the book has been proven false. So just kind of take that, put that in the back seat. Most times you bring up Ty Cobb to people, you get this certain kind of thought about him. And then the movie Cobb came out, and it was based off that book. And so I read a book by Paul Learson, and he goes, or Charles Learson, sorry about that. He goes through all of this, and he does a lot of research and kind of shows where Stump was wrong in a lot of cases, and really takes a deep dive into who Ty Cobb was, and even addresses some of the old myths about him and things like that. So it's really interesting. But it's called Ty Cobb, A Terrible Beauty. Pick that book up. It's on audiobook. I've listened to it 3 times. It's really good. I enjoy it. And Ty Cobb is just an amazing athlete and figure. But for an example, in the movie Cobb, when Learson was doing the book, he reached out to the producer because in his research, he couldn't find this certain circumstance. And what it was, Cobb was an old man in the movie, and he was staying at a hotel or whatever, and he rapes a cocktail waitress. Raped her. It was a young cocktail waitress. And so Learson asked the producer or the director, it was one of the two, where'd you come up with that story? I can't find that. And he said, we made it up. It just sounded like something Ty Cobb would do. I mean, how unfair. The guy was dead for 30-something years, and you just make up a story about him that is horrendous, and just said, because he's never, ever raped anybody as far as we know. So that's the kind of stuff that got portrayed in movies and things like that about him. So who was Ty Cobb? If you read the book, the one person he reminds me of more than anybody else that I've ever known in sports is Michael Jordan. How's that? Why Michael Jordan, you ask? Michael Jordan played basketball. He played, just until 20 years ago. And Ty Cobb played baseball back in the pre-war era in the early 1900s. Well, here's where they're very similar. If anybody remembers, if you're a Jordan fan, do you remember his Hall of Fame speech? He kind of got blasted for that. And what he did, he dug up all the things that people had ever said or done to him, and he thanked those people for it. And he gave an example. You said this about me. And if you watch The Last Dance, they talk about that he would make stuff up that people said about him to get fired up for a game, and he'd go out and torch them. Or somebody would say something just in jest before the game, and he would take it personal, and he'd go out and hang 60 on them. That was Ty Cobb. In Learson's words, he would much rather have the wind in his face than at his back. That was Ty Cobb. Connie Mack said, don't make Ty Cobb mad. He plays a lot better when he's angry. Who's that sound like? Sounds just like Michael Jordan. That was who Ty Cobb was. So, he had this reputation for spiking people and all that. If you listen to or read The Glory of Their Times, most of the guys took up for him. Now, in Sam Crawford's case, he didn't really care for him as a person, but most of the old timers took up for the way he played. He played the game hard. He played it to win. And if you blocked the base, he was coming in hot. So if you're familiar with old-time baseball, they had a glove about the size of their hand. They didn't have a big pocket where they could hold the ball in the pocket. So when you tagged somebody, you had to have both hands on the ball. So you had to dig down in there. And if you did, and you were in front of that bag, you were going to catch a spike in your arm. He wasn't trying to be mean about it or anything like that. Even the guy, the catcher, the famous picture, and there's Ty Cobb in the air, and he looks like he's a karate guy, and he's got his cleat planted in the dude's midsection. He took up for Cobb on that. He took the blame. He said, I was blocking the plate. Cobb had a right to the baseline. So that was Ty Cobb. He grew up in a small town in northeast Georgia called Royston, Georgia. It was known for its baseball. Um, when he got to be 12 years old, well, first he played for a little team called the Royston Rompers, and it's kind of like a little league team. But when he was 12, he made the Royston Reds, and that was a big deal. They had guys on that team that were close to 30 years old. He couldn't hardly swing a bat, but he made the team. He made himself useful. He used to make the cork insides for the baseballs they would use, and they wind them up. And he had a buddy of his that could cut the cowhide and make it into a baseball. So he was trying. He was always thinking. So he moves his way up. Now, talking a little bit about Ty Cobb, I've already done a video about Joe Jackson. I talked about him being illiterate, from a poor family, worked in a factory starting when he was 6 years old. Cobb, directly opposite. His dad, W.H. Cobb, was a professor. He was a principal in schools. Cobb was very well educated. In fact, he was expected to go on to be a doctor or a lawyer. His dad set it up when he was a kid to go watch a doctor do surgeries to see if it was something he liked. He sent him over to this local lawyer's house, and he had this huge library, and he talked to him about the law and things to see if that was something that interested him. His dad's idea, he was going to go to the University of Georgia, and if he loved baseball that much, he could play baseball there. The only problem was when Cobb was 11 or 12 years old, no, he was 16 years old, he made a diving catch while playing for that Royston Reds team. And back then, people would throw money on the field to try to reward you for a great play. So they throw all this change on the field. It's $11 in change, which amounts to 10 days worth of pay for a normal, hardworking citizen in Royston at the time. And they picked it all up, and he got paid. So it kind of killed his amateur status. Now, he probably could have got away with that, but shortly thereafter, a neighboring town team asked him to play, and I think he made $20 a game for like 3 games or something. And so at that point, his amateur status was over. And it was kind of him showing that, hey, I'm playing baseball. I don't care nothing about going to college. I want to do this. Another an important moment. I can't talk. Another important moment in his life was there was a guy who had made it to the pro baseball, and he was playing for all places, minor league team here in the Southern League in Nashville called the Nashville Vols. And he had written a letter back home to the Royston Reds, and basically talking about what it was like to be a pro baseball player. And they read it to the team. And Ty Cobb talked about how at that moment in time, he knew that's what he wanted to do, and he didn't care what it took. So kind of, again, Michael Jordan-esque. You know, Jordan got cut his freshman year in high school, and he didn't quit. He worked even harder, and it was a fire that burned inside of him. Same thing with Ty Cobb. So again, to me, that's such a similarity. He ended up playing for a minor league team. He got signed when he was 18 years old in Augusta. It was Augusta Tourists, and I believe they were part of the brand new league called the Sally League, the South Atlantic League. And I think that was the first year the league was around, 1905. And they played the Detroit Tigers. They came to town to play. I think they were doing spring training down in that area. It may even have been in Augusta. And they played them. And Ty Cobb had a pretty good day. And so they remembered that. And they were looking for talent. And they sent their scout down to look at him. He had a really good couple of games. And he even went on the road and watched him at an away game. And they offered him a contract. Cobb, he signed when he was 18 years old. He goes and plays for the Tigers. They're a team of misfits, alcoholics, like a lot of the dead ball period guys. They were rough around the edges, and not hardly any Southern guys. Joe Jackson ran into that same problem when he showed up with the Philadelphia Athletics. He was kind of an oddball. But the difference between him and Joe Jackson is Ty Cobb is educated. So he would go up in his room at night. He didn't go carousing and go to the bars and the saloons with the guys and be chasing women. That wasn't Ty Cobb's style. He was all about baseball, and that's what he cared about. So he would go up in the stationery of the hotel, and he would diagram plays and do things like that. He would read books. His favorite book was Les Miserables. I mean, how big a difference. So the guys looked at him at that point a little bit curious, but they were so rough around the edges and drinking. They would have booze clauses in their contract to where $200 to $500 of their yearly salary would be held out. And if they passed the booze test, in other words, if they didn't show up drunk all the time, at the end of the year, they'd get their money. Cobb didn't even have that clause in his contract because that wasn't a problem he had, but everybody else on the team did. So his rookie year, he shows up at the end of the season. He doesn't do that great. He's hitting in the mid 200s. But backtrack, another really horrible thing happened. When he was playing for that Augusta Tourist team, his mother shot and killed his dad and shot him through the window of their home. He was supposedly out of town, and for some reason he'd come back early and was outside their window. She thought it was a burglar or somebody. She pulls out her pistol and shot him dead. And so it was a big hubbub in Royston, and they thought she had a lover at their house and had shot him because he caught her in the act or whatever. She claimed that she didn't know, she couldn't see him. It was dark outside. He was standing outside the window. So it was a big deal. His dad's brothers, his uncles, were all up in arms and accusing her of all this stuff. So all that trial and stuff was going on during his rookie year. His second year, well, it really wouldn't have been his rookie year. It was when he first came up. His rookie year was in 1906. He gets called up. The guys didn't really mistreat him a lot in 05, but in 06 they did. And it got really bad. They were hazing him something awful. Matty McIntyre was the main one and didn't like him. He confronted him one day at the batting cage and said, you're not gonna hit anymore. You're not taking batting practice, so just get out of here. Cobb wouldn't have it. He looked to the other guys for support. Nobody would back him up. And so unlike a lot of rookies that would cower and maybe let it tone down, Cobb wasn't going to be like that. So he fought back. He jumped in there and hit. When he goes back to the clubhouse that day, his homemade bats that he brought with him that he's had since he played for the Royston Reds, somebody cut them into pieces and even thrown some of the parts away. So he was treated horribly. He was even going through the trial that year with his mother, and he had to go back for testimony and stuff like that. So in August of that year, in 06, he left the team for 44 days. And so we don't really know what happened, but we think he had to kind of check himself into a mental hospital to get his mind right. So he was a testy guy. He would fight you. He wanted to win more than anything. And if you got in his way, he'd take care of business. So he ends up, when he retired, he owned, believe it or not, 9,000 records in Major League Baseball. He top in batting average as a career hitter, 366. Retired with the number one amount of hits, the number one amount of stolen bases. So until Lou Brock broke his stolen base record in the, I think it was late 70s, early 80s, he owned that record. Until Pete Rose broke his hits record in the mid 80s, he owned that record. But he's still the all-time average leader. So one of the all-time greats. One of the things he took a lot of pride in was that in the initial Hall of Fame class, which was, what was it, him, Walter Johnson, Babe Ruth, and Honus Wagner, he was the number one vote getter, even over Ruth. And he would remind people of that a lot in his older age. He was very proud of that. So again, that's Ty Cobb. Great player, fantastic. Pick up the book, Charles Learson, Ty Cobb, A Terrible Beauty. It's a great read. Gives you an insight into pre-war baseball. Also tells you a lot about this interesting character and the fire that burned inside of him. So check it out. We're going to look at some cards now. Sorry I rambled for so long. It's something I'm pretty passionate about. We're going to look at the cards. Also, I did some copies of a few pictures, the photographs the cards are made from. We'll look at that alongside the card to hopefully make it a little more interesting than just looking at some cards. So hang out. We'll do that here in just a second. All right, we're back. We're going to look at some cards now, and appreciate you staying with me through the long-winded section talking about Ty Cobb. You may have just fast-forwarded through it to see the cards. But the first card is, we've got this Sports King. It's a 1933 Gaudy, actually. It's a set they came out with. You're familiar with the Gaudy set. Let me get this light where it looks better. There we go. Everybody's familiar with the 1933 Gaudy baseball sets. Well, this was a set they put out that had all kinds of sports. It had horse racing, it had swimmers and divers, it had golfers, it had football, it had all kinds of stuff. So even had a woman athlete on it. So pretty cool. Not a rare set. There was only 3 baseball players. There was Cobb and Babe Ruth and Carl Hubble, of all people. I don't know why they didn't pick Gehrig or anybody like that, but they picked Carl Hubble. He had a good year or something that year before and looked like a rising star. So here it is. You know, it's not the greatest shape, but it's a card. When I was a kid, I remember seeing it on the price guides, and so I saw this for sale. It was a pretty good price, so I grabbed it. So that is my Sports King gum, Ty Cobb. So I'll put this up here. The next one is it's a 1909 American Caramel E90-1. These cards are very similar in size to T206. Not exactly the same size, but very similar. And they got this really cool back. I like the back. It says Baseball Series, 100 Subjects, Baseball Caramels, manufactured by the American Caramel Company, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. These came in a box of caramels. I'm not sure, I don't think there's been any boxes that have survived that are the packaging that they came in. But it came with candy, so it's a candy card. That's why it's an E90-1. This is the same series that the E90-1 series is that Shoeless Joe Jackson has his rookie card. And it's with the Philadelphia A's. But yeah, it's beautiful. Got the orange sunset, just a really pretty card. I don't know if it really comes through on the video or not. Try to zoom in a little bit better. But it almost has a 3D effect with the way it's colored and stuff. So that is it. The pop count on that one is about 416 cards, so it's not rare at all. But it's not a ton of them out there, but 416 is a pretty good number. So that's that one. Put that back over here. The next one is one I showed in my last pickup video. And it's the T206 Piedmont 350, 460. And again, I picked this one up because I really wanted one that had bright red color. And the dealer I bought this from in Nashville had a bunch of them on his table. So I was able to pick the one that best suited my eye. So I wanted one that had good registration. These are notorious for being blurry. This one is not blurry. It's very sharp. So this is the first one too that I want to share the original photograph. Now again, I went to my local Walgreens and made these photos. So this is the original photograph that card is made out of. So you know, there's 4 T206 cards in that set. Let me focus in a little bit. And this is the original photograph. And this photograph and a lot of the T206 photographs were made by a photographer named Carl Horner. And he was based out of Boston. and he had been in business for about 20 years, doing just photographs inside of a studio. He did studio photographs of individuals. Never did do photographs outside, but he would come to his studio and you'd sit down and he would take a picture of you. Now, he fancied himself, well, actually, he called himself a European photographer, and he really liked to play with shadows. So you see how he'd light up one side and do a shadow on the other side. His idea behind this, he wanted the image or the subject to look heroic or something like that. If you'll notice, they're not smiling in their pictures, and they would show up. In 1902, he took all the American League teams. They all came by. They all took pictures and sat down for him and took their picture. And then in the following year, 1903, the National League teams did the same. This is the famous photo that you could see of Honus Wagner that's on the famous T206 card, and also the Tip Top Bread card, the Sporting News card. So a lot of the old pre-war cards, his photographs are used. So that's the original photograph. This photograph right here is one that's a cabinet photo. You could actually order the photos from his studio. And this photo right here sold in August of 2019 for $396,000 on a heritage auction. So that's that photo. I'll put this up here. The next card is the T206 Bad Off Shoulder card. This was my first T206 card. It's a beauty. It's so colorful. A lot of people think this is his prettiest T206 card. I would tend to agree. It's these cards are not low pop counts. They're pretty plentiful. You can find them all the time. Here's the original photograph from that one. I'm not sure we really know who took this photo, but you can see how much artistic, let me zoom in here. You can see how much the artist did on the card image in doing the sunset, the grass, even did the grain on the bat, which you cannot see in this photo. In this photo, you can tell he has a shadow, so the sun is actually on the camera side of him, not behind him where the sunset is in the card. And you can see the baseline. It looks like the fence out there behind him, but it's the same photo. And the artist did a great job of really bringing some life to it. And if you'll notice in this card, I always thought this was really interesting. Let me zoom in a little bit better. Little smokestacks back there, just so cool. So and you can see the wood grain on the bat they had to draw in. So it took them some time to do this, and stood the test of time, for sure. So put that up there. The next card is an ad-back card. So this one here is the 1916 Globe Stores. Ty Cobb is number 38. This was the first Ty Cobb I picked up. And back in the early days when I was buying, a couple years ago, when I started buying some pre-war, well, actually about a year ago, I can't remember. I wasn't as picky. I was looking more, what could I afford? I hadn't spent a lot of money on cards. And so this one, it's a little rough. It's got some staining. It's got the Globe Life back, and so it's got some water on it or something at some point. But this one right here is not as plentiful as you'd think. There's only 5 of these with this back, so I would call that rare. Not scarce, but rare. So proud to own this one. This one also was a photographer that's well known. His name was Francis P. Burke, and he took this photograph. There's also he's also got his images on other cards, and I'm about to show you. So that's that one. The next card is the 1922 E121 American Caramel card. And this is him in the batting stance. There's also one of him in a fielding And this, if you think you recognize this image, it's because it was on several cards. But this is Francis P. Burke, and here's the original photograph. This photo was sold, let's see here, it's a 1910 photograph. It was sold in August of 22 for $516,000. So it's a pretty pricey photograph. So, but you can recognize it definitely. I'm going to put that right here. Move the globe stores over. So, now Francis Burke, he was in business with a guy named Atwell, and Atwell did not take baseball photography pictures. He took photos at circuses and things like that. But their stamp or their sticker has both their names on it, and they were operating out of Chicago. So here's that. My daughter just got home from work, so she's talking to my wife. Sorry about the background noise. Here's the next card. It's a 1914. Oh, and by the way, the American Caramel card pop count is, I wrote that down somewhere, or maybe I didn't. Yeah, it's 102, so not a lot of those out there. 1914 Cracker Jack, Ty Cobb. I'm proud of this one. If it was PSA, it would have a MK designation because it's marked on the back. Love the Cracker Jack cards. If you haven't seen my Cracker Jack episode, check it out. But, you know, it's very beautiful cards. Just the red, the image. And if you'll notice, the same image, okay? So that's the second card with that image on it. I love this Cracker Jack. This one and my Shoeless Joe Jackson are my two prized Cracker Jack cards. And he's got that side-eyed glare, that Ty Cobb glare. You can kind of see the intensity in his eyes. Got his split grip going on. So that's my Cracker Jack. And then the final card, this is the first time I ever bought a postcard. It's a 1910 sepia postcard. And it's not been post-dated or written on or anything like that, but it's absolutely gorgeous. And again, if you'll notice, here we go. All three have the same Francis P. Burke image, and I thought that was pretty cool. So there's actually one more card that has this image on it, and it's called Novelty Cutlery. And there was one in a recent auction, and it was more of a high grade one, and so I passed on it. And so they don't come up very often. So this sepia postcard right here is a pop of 21 is all. That's all that's ever been graded in all the grading companies. This one, the 1914 CJ Ty Cobb, has been graded 160 times. If you're thinking, well, how do I get these grades? I have a Card Ladder subscription, and you can go on there and look at sales, and then you can hit the little pop count deal, and it'll show you all the grading companies, how many times it's been graded in each company. And I've said this in the past, but, you know, pretty sure some of these have been switched from PSA over to SGC or vice versa, and cracked out and tried to get a better grade. So pop count's always going to be a little higher maybe than what it actually is. But I don't think so on this, though, because this is such a little bit more scarce card. So anyways, that is my Ty Cobb collection, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it. A little bit about Ty Cobb. We showed the photographs and things like that. So I'll be right back with closing comments. All right, hope you enjoyed looking at the cards. We looked at a postcard, looked at a Cracker Jack card, add back cards, talked a little bit about the photographs and the photographers behind some of the cards. You saw that I have 3 different cards with the same photograph on it, all by the same guy, obviously. Pretty interesting stuff. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching my videos. And the next video is going to be a little different. and I can't wait to do it. We're gonna kind of go back in time, and I'm gonna show some of my childhood things that I still have, and I think they're pretty cool. And talk a little bit about why I collect, what I do, and how I got into collecting, and why I still collect, and what it means to me. So, thank you so much for tonight for watching, and I'll catch you next time.